And when I was taken into the church as a member of the church, at 13, everybody in my community that year, and some who are old enough will remember this, all the kids in the community who was 13 that year is rounded up. That's the African age group that Jomo Kenyatta writes about in Facing Mount Kenya. Okay? And we were put through a training for 12 months under leaders from the community. My leader was Deacon Sam Keith, who became my surrogate father. That was my African uncle, right? And so at the end of the 12 months, we went to the mooning bench, meaning we went through an initiation process, a spiritual initiation process, where we had to get on our knees on a bench with our eyes closed tightly, and our family sung their own special spiritual song and danced over us. You could only leave that bench if you got possessed. You couldn't fake it because the deacons, they were there to check you, make sure you weren't pulling the fake. And if you didn't get the Holy Ghost, what they call it, or get possessed, then you lost your place in your age group, and you had to come with another age group next year, and you'd be out of place. I didn't understand all of that until I read Facing Mount Kenya, and I go, oh my God, I went through this. And when I went through my Yoruba initiation, I went through a similar thing. And it was like we didn't lose it. Mm-hmm. We disguised it. Mm-hmm. And we hid it. Yeah. Mostly in the church, mostly in our music, mostly in our... When I went through my Yoruba initiation, I went through a similar thing. And it was like we didn't lose it. Mm-hmm. We disguised it. Mm-hmm. And we hid it. Yeah. Mostly in the church, mostly in our music, mostly in our dance, mostly in our linguistic attitude. Right. Black folks speak English with a different kind of attitude. We speak English with a different kind of grammar structure.
Niger, Congo, Bantu linguistic structure. Yeah.
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 And
yeah.
so
now what you're going through is, starting with this Baptist church, is that blacks didn't embrace what's called Christianity until the end of slavery. Very few took it on this shuffle. And then note with the McIntosh County singers, I don't know if you noticed it, they sing in the same dialect as West Africa. So when you're hearing those spirituals, it's kind of like if you've ever heard any West African who comes here and speaks English, they have a special kind of accent. That accent is the Niger-Congo Bantu speech pattern that blacks still speak. 80% of black people speak. Sing in the same dialect as West Africa. So when you're hearing those spirituals, it's kind of like if you've ever heard any West African who comes here and speaks English, they have a special kind of accent. That accent is the Niger-Congo Bantu speech pattern that blacks still speak. 80% of black people speak. So the spirituals were sung that way. You know what I mean? So what you're seeing here is not a carryover, not a retention, because these are deep structure that is deep into us. And there's a whole bunch of things that we carry and continue, as opposed to pieces and scraps. This is the core of it. So that's why I thought you would like seeing this, because this
I lived in it. I grew up in it. I'm from Georgetown, South Carolina, in the rural area. I grew up in an African village. My grandmother was Miss Pigeon. She was the chief priestess. She was the primary root woman for our area. So I lived that. We helped her gather her herbs and her healing potions. She would never bathe when she went to her house to heal, even if she had to stay there a week. She didn't bathe in that house. We would have to take water in a bucket from our house, and she would bathe in the back, in the woods, whatever, where she had privacy. She would not eat at the place she went to heal. We would bring food from our house, the children, to her, and so forth. So to live with a grandmother who was a root woman, who, when I went away to join OAU, I remember prayer she said over me when she put my head between her legs. And she told me that no one could kill me. She told me that if I didn't allow them to put it through my mouth, when she had fixed me, that's what they call it, fixing you. She had fixed me so nothing could harm me. You understand? And so I left home with that understanding. That was the lady who told me, the first time I heard the word Africa was from her, telling us where we were from. Her father had come from Africa, from the area that we now call Uganda. He was a Tutsi. Her mother came from Sierra Leone. She was Mendi. And so Mama was the first generation born here. I'm the third generation born here.
Yeah, one of your points about you were going through initiation in the Baptist church and the moaning bench and all of this are part of the institutions of spirit possession, bringing the spirit down. And then if you look at the slave narratives, you'll see where enslaved Africans would sometimes, at the end of slavery, they're going to school. And some of these kids, when they come in at Monday morning, they can hardly concentrate. Why? Because in the weekend, the people had been taking them to graveyards. And in these graveyards, they've been communing with spirits and staying there for 2 and 3 nights until they experience the same thing you were talking about with the wailing bench, spirit possession. So these were all things that were African institutions being dropped in whatever institutions we created to see that these children would be initiated into knowing who they are, that they're Africans. You know what I mean? This is
the other things we would do certain times a year. We would clean the cemetery. You know, in Ghana, that's called Okwesidai. Every 6 weeks, you should attend to your ancestors. And then once a year, you have big Okwesidai, where everybody go and clean the major cemeteries. Take the brushes and the straw and the leaves off and make it look pretty. And they, I forgot a sister who wrote a book. She used to work with Dr. Shashi McIntyre, and she did much of her work in South Carolina about the graves, the decoration of graves. And so she was able to tell which were the Congolese, which were the Akans, which were the Yoruba or Igbo, based on what was on that grave. Like on many of the graves, you saw the dishes of the people. You saw the pots. Depending on the craft, they were in the tools. And you'd have to clean them up every year and make them nice. And then part of the family was from the indigenous Africans who was here. So they buried in mounds, little hills. And we'd have to go and clean with Papa. We'd clean that with Papa's side of the people. And we would clean the mounds. And, you know, people say Indians. And we said Indian then, too, because we didn't understand we were the African predecessors. So, but we still clean their graveyards. They're still there right this minute. Now that the anthropologists and archaeologists from the cities are coming in, they're telling us we can't go to our own people's grave mounds to clean them. So,
cleansing of things. This goes back all over Africa, and it's called cult. And we'll often think cult as, you know, some brainwashing group that you get into. No, it's cultivated.
yes.
So in Kemet, a spirit would reside inside of a particular statue. And it could be any of the netters of ancient Kemet. And once or twice a year, they would bring those out for the community. But during the time in which they're inside of a temple, the priest is cleansing them so that they're purified, so that the spirit that's inside of a particular object, it could be a carving or whatever, can operate appropriately. And then all of the celebration that occurred later that we find in the Black church, you know, such as praise, worship, that's done when this is brought into the community and people shout, dance, play drums, and praise. And that, again, that's intrinsic to Black worship practice to this day. That's Africa. And a lot of blacks don't know where it comes from, so they'll quote some little unknown passage in the Bible. Well,
Right.
whites have the same passage. They don't do that. That's not their form of worship. That's your African spirit, because you have to draw the spirit down by
Mhm.
praising it, singing, dancing, shouting. So this is all basic to our culture, African as you get. You know what I mean?
And they didn't have to amalgamate because African culture is not as different as people think it is.
Exactly.
Ecology and environment determine the kinds of tools you use, but the fundamental philosophical understanding of universe and nature is the same. And so you watch all of these varied communities from Africa amalgamated into the African American and produce an extraordinary culture that no one dare call African
Right.
because it's so fundamentally
Right.
it's core.
And spirit is so central to all of it. Like your comment is, if it don't feel right, my spirit don't like it. That's you. Or the average black person, the spirit said this to me. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that's common. That's common discourse every day. I mean, I'm doing my feet, so I get some, work on my feet, and it's all systems in there. Well, baby, the spirit said this, and the blah blah blah, and they ain't talking about the church. They just talking about everyday life. You know what I mean?
And let me tell you about some other forces, because we brought our deities with us. There was Papa, my grandfather, my mother's father, whose house I grew up in, would tell us about the Plat Eyes. Now, how many people ever heard of the Plat Eyes? You know?
Yeah.
The Plat Eyes are spirits that roam the forest at nights. These are spirits who have not found peace yet. And so they're still roaming the roads. And so we were always warned not to go out on the roads at night without an elder with us. And that elder would always carry a hickory stick with a silver dollar embedded in the top. Because only that hickory stick and that silver dollar could fight off the Plat Eyes. You know? When we were children, we didn't know. We believed the Plat Eyes was as real as touching your own flesh. Now I know that the Plat Eyes are real. Because there was a period where I thought, well, oh, that was just popping them superstitious. Then I learned African culture and was, oh my God, they were other forces in and about our lives, and they knew how to handle them. You know? I remember one night Papa tells a story about this particular Plat Eye that bothered him every night he walked home, and he had to come through the back of the church. And so this night he's walking, and this Plat Eye is a bird. It's black dark, but he's got his hickory stick. And the Plat Eye was a bird and kept flying around. And so he would shush the bird when the bird would go, and when he got near the corner, it was a bull standing in the middle of the road, being about to let him by. So he took on this bull, because he knew it was a Plat Eye. He knew it was a spirit. So he took it on with his hickory stick. And him and that bull, they fought in Yemen. They tell you the stories. He fought with that bull for about 2 or 3 hours. It was only 5 minutes. But he fought with the bull, and the bull ran off in the bush. And he made it home. So the next day he went back to see it. Maybe he injured the thing, and he found a dead bird side the road. And I never quite got the story about why he found a dead bird, but I think the dead bird represents the point that there was a spirit, and it had possessed something, and he had to fight that living body that contained that spirit that was interfering with his journey. I mean, that's the kind of story we heard every day. Or the Barabbas story that taught us, like my mom used to teach us every night before we went to bed. We had to hear the stories. Everybody gathered in a circle around me, and that was my mom. And she would tell us these stories. One of the Barabbas story, I didn't think out till later, had to do with greed, and it was the candy tree. And so the elders would let you go in the candy tree, but you were told only to eat a certain amount of candy. Then you had to come out at a certain time and go to bed. Well, Barabbas went in the tree, he decided he's going to get greedy, and he overate. And the belly was too big, so he couldn't come out of the tree, and it was nighttime, so now he can't get back home in time. I forgot the rest of the story, but I remember that. I'm like, we would get them every night. They kept their folklore. They kept their ethical, moral traditions and stories and metaphors, and they taught us that as children. your stomach or get on your side because the hag is riding you. So what they do to keep the hag from bothering the children, they sprinkle salt and pepper around your bed. Because they say the hag was some evil person in the community who would take off their skin at night and come and ride the people. So to keep the hag from riding you, you put salt and pepper. Because without their skin, they couldn't cross the salt and pepper line to get to you. And you don't think it'll send your children. When I got older, I started thinking, oh my God, these people, they were Africans to the core. It wasn't just the way they carried the wood on their head like they do in the continental dances we did, or the needle we used to sew the fishing net, or the fishing net we used, which was the same as theirs, and the manner in which we did it. All of those things I grew up in. When I went to Africa, it was like not leaving South Carolina, you know, when I saw what I saw.
Yeah.
And it made me remember all of these other things, the hag, the flat eyes, the Barabbas story my mama would tell. And we realized we never gave it up. It came in our minds and our DNA in ourselves. And we practiced it under whatever disguise we had to survive in America, but we never gave up being Africans ever.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I want to remind people to subscribe to the Dr. Owen Sishaka Show, contribute to the Weeds thing so that you can support people who are burned out in this Weeds fire. James has a limited amount of time left. And a brother who is in the audience is from Suriname, and he's a gifted spirit medium. He could see the spirits around me that protect me. And I remember when I was in Ghana, and I was in a village in Ghana, and when the priest came up, when he came to me, he jumped back. And the guy said, you have these fierce spirits protecting you. And then he said, because the FBI and CIA tried to take me out 3 times. He said, oh, there were many other times, but your spirit told you to go to a different place. And you don't need to know.
And other spiritual leaders around the world recognize these things. I'm in Mecca in 74. Me and Rodnell, Malcolm's nephew. And the people had not seen African American Muslims, so they took our passports. It was just floating around the airport. Everybody just see it. So the intelligence people said, well, give us a day or so, we'll find your passports. So we're staying at High Central. The second night, Ronnie and I standing having a Coca-Cola, and 3 men walked up out of the desert, dressed in white. Old men. One was younger than the others, big. And he came and they stood abreast us, and then the big one came and walked in front of us and brought his face right up to mine and jumped back. And took a deep breath. And he did it again. And he jumped back. Now, I'm nervous as can be. This is my first time overseas in Arabia. And so when he tried to do it the 3rd time, I stuck my hand out and said, excuse me, sir. And he says, you speak English? But in a very broken English. I said, yes. He said, where are you from? So I wanted to get some strength. So I said, I'm from Harlem, New York. To the figure, being from Harlem, everybody knew what Harlem is. I was so scared. And the man looked at me and he pointed his finger and he says, you're going to be a great man someday. That scared me. And I said, I grabbed his hands and I said, sir, why are you saying this? Now, I'm the young, strong dude, right? He's the old dude, right? He pulled out of my clutch like I was a weak baby. That my knees buckled. Because I was strong then. I was a martial artist. I was into my thing. That man, it was just like I had no power. And then I begged. I said, please, sir, why are you saying these things to me? He says, when we get ready for you, we will come to you in your dreams. Then he turns around and he joins the other 2 and they walk off through the gate. I turned to Rodnell, this is Ella's son. I said, you know what that, he says, you hear what that N said? Because now I'm trying to find some strength, right? And he's drinking the Coke like he didn't even see what happened. So I says, Rodnell, did you hear him? I said, I'm going to go find him. So I run towards the gate and he yells to me, you'll never see him again. I never saw it.
That was a spirit. It was a human being, but it was your time to get that message And we always have these connections, and it's nothing that's accidental. There's the idea of an accident is superstition because you can't explain why this happened. So he was there to prepare you, to tell you down the road something's going to happen. Prepare yourself for it now. And he could see your spirit. He could see it.
I took on the Saudi government. I was arrested by the Central Intelligence at Chase Bank. I escaped from them in Jeddah and went and hid in Mecca for a week. I mean, but to me, it was all happening so fast. I wasn't thinking of nothing I was doing except I was doing what I was doing. And I remember when I got to Kennedy 3 weeks later, and the young man is searching my bag, and he asked me, "Why were you in Arabia?" I said, "I was on a Hajj." I said, "I had diplomatic immunity. I'm an imam." And he blurts out, and the whole airport had the, "Why can't you be a good Christian like everybody else?" So the big man came over to me and told him, says, "Put Mr. Small's stuff back in his bag and send the bags on to Boston." And he calls me aside. He said, "We've been watching you for the last 3 weeks. We know you were stealing food to eat. We know you had no money. We don't know how you got home," he said, "because we blocked that pathway." But that was another spirit. That's when I learned spirits are real. And he said, this is the CIA, right? He reaches in his pocket and gives me $50 to buy the food. He gives me $50. He said, "Buy yourself some food, Mr. Small, and you get home safely."
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, those are spirits of Africa that are with you that keeps you going. So we're going to wrap up.
And the young hitman from that family and go down and jack up the Klan. And I thought they did a wonderful job. I never really heard that history before until that discussion. But there was such an incident. When you see this coming episodes, where we show the feds embedded in the numbers and drug movement, and Bumpy is interfacing with them until he finds out that they're trying to kill Malcolm. And then we have to go after the feds. They can't tell you too much to save Malcolm. And then they want to hit Che Guevara because we got Malcolm and Che in a close relationship through a couple of episodes. And both of them making lengthy speeches, which is going to be nice. And to hear Che, I wanted to say freedom or death, but they got him to say freedom or homeland. Freedom or homeland. That's as close to freedom or death as we can get, but we got the idea that Che is, before he said Venceremos, he said freedom or homeland, that all Cubans should understand they should be willing to say our homeland or death, our homeland or death. Even now, you gotta factor in a factor called Prince Hall Freemasonry, and starting from the 1700s, and understand that is not a Masonic movement, but an African liberation movement couched in Masonry. And you won't really appreciate that until you realize David Walker comes from there, Richard Allen comes from there, Athlon Jones comes from there, and on down the line. All of our great activists is coming out of that school. So one must then beg the question, what the hell is going on in this Prince Hall Lodge that is producing these kinds of characters, And then you see that same thing happens when you get the AME Church and the AME Episcopal Church. You'll again see that leadership element that is building banks, that is building schools, that is building Black hospitals, emerging from these institutions, right? And so by the time you get to the end of slavery in the chain form, you see the white community is trying to corral us mentally, but the black community is saying, cool, we need a sanctuary. And the only sanctuary we had was that church. And the sanctuary being the place where you can go and be you and do you without interference from your enemies. So the church becomes the sanctuary to us. It may be the church to somebody, the onlooker, but out of that sanctuary comes the Knights of Pythias, the Odd Fellows, the Daughters of Ruth, the Eastern Stars, the Daughters of Isis. These are benevolent associations that's building and running the politics and the economic of the black community for the sake of the black community, building banks, building insurance company, building cabs company, building busing companies all across our communities, across America. That's where this emanation is coming from. So if you don't really look at all of that and you're just thinking of the worship service and the use of the Bible, then you miss the African American's presence in the black church as a phenomenon.
This point that Brother Smalls is making is extremely important because, number one, the assumption is that we embraced Christianity during slavery, and then you had the Willie Lynch thing, which proves to be a myth. Blacks ain't fallen for no scam. Yes, there was attempts to brainwash us, and yes, some of it worked, but for the most